Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video I wanted to talk about the fantastic classic pulp heroine, the Domino Lady, who appeared in 6 different pulp magazine short stories in the Spicy Pulp magazines, all in the year of 1936. This character is public domain and has seen a variety of different adaptations in comics and short story collections and even audio dramas in the years since the relaunch of the character in the early 1990s in the comics world. So this is a character that was extraordinarily obscure until she was rediscovered in those 1990s comics and also by pulp historians and saw a number of reprint collections. What makes the Domino Lady so interesting and striking is, firstly, it's a female pulp heroine, a female avenger, which was not very common in the magazines. There were, of course, some pulp heroines, but it was much rarer to have a masked female vigilante on her own mission in war against crime. The pulps were dominated by male hero characters. And on top of this, as I mentioned, the Domino Lady appeared in what is known as the Spicy Pulp magazines. Now, for those unaware, what the Spicy moniker refers to is that these were particular pulp magazines that were very obviously geared towards attracting male readership, shall we say, and cramming in as much as they could of the world of sexual allure. So at the time, these could be even considered more of pornographic material. Not that they were ever that descriptive, but at the time, they were deemed too risque, and so they were actually, depending on city ordinances and rulings and things, they were sold separately from the rest of the pulp magazines on newsstands, so they wouldn't be sold to children, and some places actually had to sell them in brown paper bags, especially because the beautiful pulp covers would almost always be more suggestive than the already wonderfully lurid pulp magazine covers of the non-spicy pulp magazines. So for a particular period of time, the spicy pulp magazines were doing very well before they ran into more and more censorship issues. And so the Domino Lady appeared in 1936 and was written by the author Lars Anderson. But it's really unknown who this Anderson was, whether that was really the writer's actual name or whether it was a nom de plume. And due to the efforts of Will Murray and other pulp historians, there are several possibilities as to the identity of Lars Anderson, but it's never been fully determined who actually wrote the Domino Lady stories, and again, whether that was a cover name and it was another author, or there really was a person writing these stories by that name. The character's first 5 appearances were all in the magazine Saucy Romantic Adventures, one of the spicy pulps, and that title alone makes you curious to see just how saucy these romantic adventures could be. And then the 6th and final appearance was in a different magazine, Mystery Adventure magazine, and I think you can see there already how publishers were trying to downplay the negative stigma of the spicy pulps by switching characters over to other titles or changing titles of the magazine to try and downplay the, shall we say, more sensual aspects that were crammed into the spicy pulps. So once you establish that the Domino Lady is a character from the spicy pulps and no one really knows exactly who the author was, and add in the rarity factor of this being a masked female vigilante on her own personal mission against crime for revenge, then you have to actually look at the stories and the character of the Domino Lady, or Ellen Patrick, her real name, to really understand why these stories have such a longevity and why they're so fascinating. And this also answers why the character has been adapted many different times and has such a wealth of possibilities in terms of what you can do with this character even today. The backstory and setup to the character is that Ellen Patrick is a young socialite in her 20s. She's a college graduate and is also described as such a breathtakingly beautiful blonde with a figure that is beyond comprehension, essentially. And of course, those factors are lovingly described throughout the text of all 6 stories. They never go overboard. They're actually quite sensually described, which is very striking, but all of the aspects of sex that are part of the character are there for a reason, and she uses and trades upon her allure to get the better of her enemies, and thus she is a fully empowered character. And for 1936 in the Spicy Pulp magazines, that is not something you came across. So again, even in the setup and origin, despite it being a Spicy Pulp story and obviously having to lean into the aspects of sex that the Spicy Pulps were trading on, the character is absolutely fascinating. But anyway, Ellen Patrick is informed after graduating college and being on a trip in the Far East, sort of seeing the world, that her father, Owen Patrick, who is the district attorney in Los Angeles, has been killed. And it's quite obvious that he was killed off by the very members of the secret political machine that controls California that he was directly opposing as the district attorney. His goal was to try and eradicate all corruption in the state. So Ellen Patrick comes back to California and decides she's going to take up a personal mission of revenge and wage a one-woman war against this secretive political machine. And even if it takes the rest of her life, she will humiliate, destroy, and eradicate elements of this political machine, one wealthy scoundrel at a time. To do this, she creates the persona of the Domino Lady, a seemingly unstoppable thief who is, of course, unbelievably beautiful and trades on her beauty in order to slip into areas unseen and get one over on men who might confront or try to stop her. She adopts what is probably not the most practical costume, but her iconic look of having either a white backless gown showing off her incredible figure with a black cape, or the opposite, having a black backless gown with a white cape. And then, of course, the famous domino mask, thus where she gets the name. And also, she carries a small .22 pistol concealed on her person to be used only in extreme emergencies, but she is not really wanting to ever take a life. She will if she has to, but that's not her goal. Her goal is to smash the political machine of corruption. She also carries a syringe with knockout fluid, which she uses when in tight spots, and in some of the stories is also shown to use other bits of gadgetry, including knockout gas, but the primary weapons and tools are the small .22 pistol and the knockout syringe, both of which are somehow concealed in the skin-tight gown, or sometimes in the cape, or even sometimes a small wrist bag. And the other element of the costume is that it's meant to be easily disposable, or it's something that can be worn underneath clothes, especially if she goes to a high society ball and is already wearing something over it. She can just slip away somewhere, put on the mask, and remove her other clothing to reveal the iconic dress costume underneath. And strikingly, even the costume is said to be able to be disposed of in a pinch. She can pour a certain acid over it, and the whole thing goes up in smoke, thus removing any incriminating evidence. So the Domino Lady is always shown to be an intelligent character who's always out to outthink her opponents, but also society at large, because she keeps up the pretense of being Ellen Patrick, young socialite who has enough money to live off of because her father left a certain inheritance, and so after his death, she's just sort of living off that money. What the rest of the world doesn't know or suspect is that she is, of course, the famous Domino Lady who is able to carry off anything she sets her mind to, and always leaves her iconic calling card at the scene of a crime that actually reads "Compliments of the Domino Lady," which is the wonderful classic pulp fiction delicious touch. And that element, along with another idea, a notion that develops that the Domino Lady doesn't keep all of the loot that she gains. She actually donates most of it to charity. She just keeps enough for operating expenses, essentially. That and the calling card and the air of having a slight degree of still retaining those elements of polite society and doing things sometimes with a bit of a smile to the proceedings. That's the element that I think makes the character really stand out, and in some aspects almost gives the Domino Lady stories, and in terms of the Ellen Patrick character, almost a tinge of maybe being a bit like a female version of the Saint in certain ways. And if my description so far hasn't already given you this idea, the Domino Lady is very much a Catwoman prototype. It's of course not known for sure if the Domino Lady was referenced in the creation and development of the Catwoman character, but all of the core ideas of Selina Kyle being a master thief and being drawn to a life of crime and essentially basking in the thrill of her adventures, all of that is here in the Domino Lady, because another aspect is that Ellen Patrick is essentially just living for these adventures. It's not just that it's a mission of revenge. Yes, that's part of it. But she'll also accept jobs and requests when friends are in trouble, and she decides to take a hand as the Domino Lady on their behalf, whether her friends know it or not. She doesn't really have much of a life outside of being the Domino Lady, and she constantly reflects on the thrill it gives her, and that's what she lives for. And should she have to take a life as the Domino Lady, or should she be killed as the Domino Lady? It really doesn't matter. It's the thrill that becomes the reason for her existence alongside the mission of revenge that originally started her escapades. And she becomes quite proficient as the Domino Lady. When the stories start, she's been acting as this vigilante for several years, so she's an established presence. And so the criminal underworld, high society, and the police force know all about the mysterious Domino Lady who no one can ever capture or stop, and no one knows what she looks like. So it's a fascinating premise. The stories themselves are on the simpler side because they are obviously roughly about 10 pages each in a dual column format, and they were meant to be in a Spicy Pulp magazine alongside other stories. But interestingly, they do actually build on one another, and the character grows and develops, and some of the themes I've talked about do start to emerge, especially the character not keeping all of her ill-gotten gains and donating them to charity, how she actually carries out the seemingly impossible heists or recovering incriminating documents, how she feels towards the opposite sex and the various potential love interests that creep in, and also the character's inner turmoil, her realization that she's really just living at this point to avenge her father's death, and really also the thrill she gets out of having these adventures, some of which she admits is a sexual thrill because she enjoys being able to get one over on men and also get away with her secret identity and be essentially flaunting it at all times. And she is also a very sensual character. She does enjoy having what is, again, always lovingly described as a breathtaking figure, and that's where you really get the content of the Spicy Pulps. It's constantly reflected in the stories, but it's actually made part of the character. It's never just shoved or forced in. It all feels a part of the same world. And so when you actually read these stories, the sensual aspects actually make the stories more interesting and engaging, because at their core, the 6 stories are mostly on the simpler side, and you can tell, especially in the first couple stories, that the author is trying out different ideas with the same general sort of premise. So the location and some of the supporting characters change, but the first couple stories are very much in the same vein, and then it's the really the last 3 stories that start to do things differently. And unfortunately, there were only 6 stories. I think this character could have definitely grown. I don't know if there ever would have been a full magazine devoted to the character, or if the character would have made it entirely out of the Spicy Pulps, but Ellen Patrick, aka the Domino Lady, is one of the most fascinating of all pulp characters. And I think that's why she's lasted as a character and had the sort of rebirth that started in the 1990s. And that actually happened through Eros Comics. And I guess somebody realized this obscure character from 1936 was public domain. So in those comics, the Domino Lady was brought back, except now they really leaned into the sexual aspects and essentially made an adult comic for that point in the 1990s, really pushing those elements. So I guess you could say that it was the 1990s comic equivalent of a Spicy Pulp magazine, but obviously much more explicit, which I don't think you really need to take the character in that direction. And that's always something you see modern adaptations sort of struggle with. You know, how far do you go with the sex aspects? Because it is an important part of the character. But I think the real balance is there in the original stories of having the sensual qualities and the character trading on her good looks and using that as further character building, actually, and that the character does get not just a thrill of adventure, but a bit of a sexual charge out of what she's doing as this masked vigilante. So if you're looking at one of the modern adaptations of the character, you'll definitely note that the sexual aspects are there somehow. It's just some really lean heavily into that. And I think if the character is being pushed too far into that realm, I think it does the character a disservice. There have been a variety of reprint publishers and publishers who specialize in pulp characters who have done a number of stories and comics with the Domino Lady, again, because she is a public domain character. She is free to use. So like the Spider, she is used much more frequently than the most famous pulp characters like the Shadow and Doc Savage, who are, of course, still under ownership by Condé Nast. So you'll see the Domino Lady pop up in a bunch of different things, but it really took off when Bold Venture Press did their reprint collection of the original stories entitled Compliments of the Domino Lady. This was in the early 2000s, and then the character would be picked up by Moonstone Books, who's done the most material. They've done some really interesting looking short story collections where a bunch of different authors come in and take a crack at adapting the character. They've done some crossovers with other famous pulp characters, especially ones in the public domain, and a ton of different comics. I have one of those here, which is an issue of the Domino Lady's Threesome. And as you can see, the comics do lean into the sexual overtones that are part of the character. So there's always that fun, risque aspect. But of course, the trick is not overdoing that, and that's something that all of the Moonstone and Bold Venture materials and the Airship 27 materials do very well. Airship 27 is a wonderful pulp publisher who does original stories, and they've essentially done what Moonstone did of doing short story volumes, but they've done a whole series of them. There's also a handful of new stories in one of the Bold Venture pulp magazines, which has a whole bunch of different pulp short stories just collected into a magazine entitled Awesome Tales. So you can experience a whole bunch of different adaptations of the character in both books and comics, but you should really go back and start with the original 1936 Lars Anderson stories. There are a number of different collected versions, and it is a little bit tricky trying to figure out what is the best version to get a hold of. And since the stories are public domain, some of them have been frequently anthologized. For example, one of the stories is in the essential Black Lizard Big Book of Pulps that Otto Penzler put together. This is the first of the big, giant, oversized paperback tomes. So if you have this on the shelf or you see it in a bookstore, this incredible value book will also give you one of the 6 original Domino Lady stories. Now, since these are public domain materials, you'll see there's a variety of different printed and ebook editions claiming to be, a complete Domino Lady collection or definitive collection. And you'll also want to try to find one that has the original artwork in terms of the internal illustrations from the pulp magazines. There's not a whole lot of them, but each story usually has at least 1 or 2. The version you'll really want to get is Bold Venture's collection, which was the first major reprint of all the stories. This is the original hardcover edition, which goes under the title of the Complete Collection of the Domino Lady, or Domino Lady Complete Collection. And this also has the moniker of being the Steranko edition. And that's because Steranko did not just this gorgeous, breathtaking cover of Ellen Patrick theatric as the Domino Lady, breaking into a room filled with Egyptian artifacts and a black cat, but he also contributed a new internal art illustrations throughout, and a really fascinating origin story. So this collection has the original 6 stories plus Steranko's exclusive sort of what-if origin story. So he tried to essentially work out how the character would have developed realistically, what her first adventure would have been like, using the little bits of background material we have in the original 6 short stories. So it does take some risks. The writing style is obviously a bit different, and it's got a grittier tone than the original 6 stories. I think it's really fascinating to read. I don't know if it's exactly essential, and I don't like it as much as the original 6 stories, but it's a really well thought out attempt at doing an origin story, and it does stay in keeping with the overall period tone of the 1930s, so you can look at it as a solid origin story for the character, but it's drawing directly from the bits of origin we have in the original stories. Now, as I said, this is the hardcover original edition, which actually lists it being printed by Vanguard, but this is essentially what was then turned into the Bold Adventure version, which uses the same cover art but is a soft cover, and that edition is sold under the title Compliments of the Domino Lady. And the difference is that it's obviously no longer a hardcover, but you lose the exclusive Steranko origin story. It's just got the 6 original stories with the original artwork. So that's why it's better if you can find the original hardcover edition. But unfortunately, this is long out of print, and I had to spend quite a long while trying to find an affordable copy. There's also a limited signature edition, which has some signed art prints, and that came in a deluxe slip box, which is silver and just an image of the famous Domino mask. That was done in extremely limited quantities and is long out of print and is usually absurdly expensive nowadays. So where you might pay $25 to $50 or more for this edition, you'll probably pay closer to $150 or more for that limited signature edition. And of course, you can get the Bold Venture version, which is still in print, for about $15 to $20 brand new, but it doesn't have the origin story. Now, this book also has some notable extras, which are really important. So we have an introduction talking about the character and the sort of rediscovery in the 1990s. And then we have a fantastic essay by the great Will Murray talking specifically about his attempts to try and nail down exactly who was Lars Anderson, and realizing that nobody really knows. The whole volume is printed in black and white, which looks fantastic, and of course matches the original Pulp magazine pages. But each story has this beautiful, unique Steranko artwork expressly designed for that particular story. It retains the original dual-column format of the Pulp magazines, just with reset typeface and matching chapter headings. And then the original internal illustrations are maintained for each story, but they're basically blown up and slightly modified to fill an entire page instead of just taking up a portion of the original page. Some pulp reprints do this, and while I would prefer it retaining the image exactly as it was in terms of the sizing within the text, this is still extremely well done, and at least we have a lovely presentation of all the original artwork. And then we have the Steranko art for his origin story. And these are all printed in black and white in this volume, but the signature edition has them in color. That's the other major upgrade. But honestly, I think these look better in black and white and much more striking. And then there's a closing page about Steranko himself. So of course, there are many versions to choose from, but if you can, definitely try to get the original hardcover complete collection of the Domino Lady. It is really the best version to have, as you get all 6 original stories with no alterations. The original artwork is reproduced along with beautiful new Steranko artwork, and you get his exclusive origin story in this volume. It's also significantly less expensive than the pricey out-of-print signature version. But if you just want the stories in the best overall collection, you can get the still in print version from Bold Venture Press, which is the softcover entitled Compliments of the Domino Lady. It's essentially got everything else from this volume just in a softcover edition and without the bonus origin story. In the description, I'll have links to Bold Venture's site and also links to further information about Moonstone Books and Airship 27's Domino Lady stories, and of course, the various comics as well. There's also a great podcast called Suitors of the Domino Lady, which is exclusively devoted to detailing the adventures and adaptations of our favorite pulp adventurers. They've done some really fantastic deep analysis of some of the original stories, doing such a deep dive that some of those episodes are an hour and a half long, and it's still for the original 10-page short pulp stories. So if you're interested in the character or want to know more, it's a fantastic resource, as they also talk about the various reprint collections and which versions to get, like I've highlighted in this video. It's an ongoing series that's going to cover the rest of the stories and other adaptations and then potential other pulp heroines as well, but it's a fantastic resource if you're curious to know more. The Domino Lady has been a character I have always been curious about, but it was only recently that I sat down and decided to read all the stories. Well, really, it was because I've been trying to find a copy of the original hardcover complete collection so I could read all the stories plus the Steranko origin prequel. And I have to say, it was even more fascinating than I thought it would be. I had encountered some of the adaptations of the character in terms of the more modern comics and things, and of course the striking imagery, so I knew the basic idea of the character, but I waited until I could get the complete collection so I could read through and experience everything at once. I think when you actually read the original stories, it explains why the character has a timeless appeal that's felt even today, and also why she's one of the most utilized of the public domain pulp characters, not just because she's one of the few pulp heroines, but because there are so many elements that make the character unique, and you've always got the element of the spicy. In terms of all of the sensual and sexual elements that were part of the original concoction of the character and the character's world for the Spicy Pulp magazine audience in the 1930s. And that adds a certain level of fun and sort of knowing humor, because when you read the original stories, you can obviously get the sense that these were very risque for the time, but of course are incredibly tame now. But also, it's quite surprising that you think it's going to be a certain way when you go in, but those elements are always described in a very sensual and frankly in a very tasteful way. They're not obscene at all. There was no reason to put them behind counters in brown paper bags, at least for the Domino Lady stories. But that element of the risque is always there, and that makes the stories have a unique edge, and that's something that's part of the character and is seen in all the modern adaptations. So I think that's why she's stuck around for so long, and thank goodness she was rediscovered. Now that I've actually read the stories and become fully acquainted with the character, I would love to go make a Domino Lady movie right now, because it would be fantastic. I mean, the character just screams should be made into a movie because she's that freaking awesome. Of course, getting a pulp movie made in 2026 is easier said than done, but since it's a public domain character, it is at least easier in that sense. But I still think there could be a fantastic feature film adaptation or some other adaptation of the character in the visual medium. But until then, we have the fantastic modern adaptations in books and comics and the original stories of one of the most iconic of pulp heroes, and possibly the pulp heroine with the greatest longevity and staying power. Again, these stories are fascinating. They are well written. They do have unique qualities, and the character for 1936 is actually strikingly an empowered character. She is extraordinarily confident and assured and has great skills, but she's also still a human character. She's not perfect, and in all the stories, she has to think on the run and avoid capture, and those elements play into the striking notion that she lives for the thrill of what she does. What began as a mission of revenge is now really the meaning to her whole existence, and she actually recognizes recognizes that certain emptiness and the life she could have had that she rejected and how that weighs upon her. So she still has human thoughts and emotions. It's not just a adventurous with no sense of reality outside of each and every adventure. She may live for the thrill of the chase, but always carrying the baggage that goes along with that. So these stories are absolutely essential reading. They're fantastic and timeless. I would recommend them to anyone. The character is in the public domain, so you might be able to find the stories floating around online in terms of ebooks and things, but really I do recommend getting the complete collection in the original hardcover or the still in print softcover version from Bold Venture Press. This is just one of the classic pulp characters, and I'm so glad I've now finally read all the stories, because now I want to go and dive into all of the other adaptations that I haven't yet, because Ellen Patrick is such a fantastic, truly fascinating character that you want to know more. So as always, I hope my babblings about pulp fiction and the classic pulp heroes has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Again, I'll have links in the description to everything I discussed, plus where you can go to get a wonderful collection of the stories if you want to read them yourself, and trust me, you definitely want to. So as always, please do keep supporting the incredible efforts of pulp historians and pulp reprint publishers who are helping to keep our pulpular history alive, and also the efforts of the wonderful publishers who continue to publish new pulp stories featuring the old characters and new pulp stories of entirely original material, because these are all primarily independent ventures and small publishers, and they need all the support they can get. So keep reading the magical pages of pulp fiction, keep reading print books, and thank you ever so much for watching. This video has been brought to you compliments of the Domino Lady.